If I look in the traditional macro area, most of them aren't really talking about crypto. A lot of them are kind of doing the thing where like, oh, it's dead. So I do think we're kind of seeing a shift away from some of these kind of centralized custodians. And I think it's going to disperse globally. I think some of it's going to be muted for a while because it affects how much big capital can go into it. And so I think it's a troubled area, but I think there's going to be future bubbles, future growth cycles in this whole space again.
The past year has been mostly unfavorable toward the cryptocurrency industry, especially with the several rounds of collapses and widespread contagion in the industry. As collapses followed bankruptcies in 2022, it reinforced the belief in the traditional financial world that cryptocurrencies have no intrinsic value and are bound to fail in the long run. Many prominent investors and media personalities again called the death of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Though this isn't the first time critics are giving multiple reasons and writing long-winded essays about how the cryptocurrency industry is nothing but a dud, the events of the past year had some of the industry's biggest investors questioning the future of even their favorite crypto projects. Thankfully, we've had some reprieve in 2023, with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies hitting multi-month highs. These rallies have done much for sentiments and increased confidence in the industry's future. However, there is also the issue of the ongoing regulatory onslaught on crypto projects and exchanges, which has dampened the impact of the impressive rallies despite the harsh economic conditions. In a recent interview with ZeroX Research, popular macro analyst and investment strategist Lyn Alden discussed her outlook on the cryptocurrency industry amidst the drawdowns and increased regulatory scrutiny. Alden explained that the consensus in the macro world is that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are dead, but she has a lot of evidence that suggests otherwise. Not only is Alden certain that Bitcoin and other top cryptocurrencies are not dead, but she is also convinced that the industry will revolutionize existing payment systems and our overall perception of money. During the interview, Alden also discussed the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust and how much exposure or otherwise it is for the leading crypto asset. Before we listen to Lyn Alden's interview, please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications so you never miss any of our future videos. Also, ensure you drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm, so we can continue to bring you these videos. Thanks and enjoy the video.
If I look in the traditional macro area, most of them aren't really talking about crypto. A lot of them are kind of doing the thing where like, oh, it's dead, right? Kind of like how 2018, 2019, it just kind of not on their radar anymore. It's dead. Uh, same, including Bitcoin for that matter. Basically, they're just like, yep, the whole space bubble, it's gone. They view it kind of like ARC style stocks, basically unprofitable growth stocks. Um, Obviously, when I look at Bitcoin spaces or when I look at crypto spaces, which are increasingly kind of two separate spaces with some degree of overlap. Um, Basically, the Bitcoin people are generally in pretty good spirits. I mean, I was at Pacific Bitcoin, for example, while FTX was happening. And so the Bitcoin price was nuking, the whole industry was nuking, and people were like celebrating and laughing about it and just kind of just kind of rolling with it. Um, Obviously there's a lot of development happening in the space. People often talk about lack of Bitcoin development, but of course that's mostly base layer focus. There's actually quite a bit of ecosystem development, basically making Bitcoin easier, more accessible, faster, more expressive, things like that on various parts of the ecosystem. As for crypto, I mean, this week was big. I mean, the past couple weeks, there have been a number of people warning about increasing levels of banking system cutting off various crypto entities. And then we've kind of seen the hammer come down on custodial crypto staking from the SEC. Basically, kind of looking at that as like an investment contract that is subject to regulations. I think this has been rather telegraphed since the FTX debacle. That really kind of lit a fire under regulators, gave them a lot more, kind of just coverage to go after certain things. We've also seen a shift in the head of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. He used to kind of talk about Ethereum being a commodity like Bitcoin. He walked those back in November, those statements back, and kind of would say, okay, Bitcoin's a commodity. We'll see about everything else. We'll leave that to the SEC, which kind of, we kind of know Gary Gensler's view on that whole thing where Bitcoin, maybe a couple other proof of work coins are kind of commodities in his view, while everything else is at risk of being labeled a security. So I do think we're kind of seeing a shift away from some of these kind of centralized custodians. And I think it's going to disperse globally. I think some of it's going to be muted for a while because it affects how much big capital can go into it. And so I think it's a troubled area, but I think there's going to be future bubbles, future growth cycles in this whole space again. I think for the vast majority of people, the best thing if they want to have exposure is you just buy and cold storage some Bitcoin. That's I think the cleanest way to do it. GBTC is really and some of the others are kind of an option for people that want exposure within a brokerage account and don't really have another option. And that's kind of been the shame of the SEC is that, ironically, by not allowing a spot Bitcoin ETF, they've made it harder for just retail and institutional investors to access the space within certain of those pools of capital, right? Roth IRA, registered investment advisors, all these kind of pools of capital want some exposure, and they have to kind of go into worse products than they otherwise would if there was a spot ETF. We see that, for example, there's a successful spot ETF in Canada. There's also similar types of products in Europe, Latin America. It's kind of, United States has been a pretty slow jurisdiction in this regard. And so, overall, I don't think GBTC is very attractive, but it does have arbitrage opportunities if someone is willing to go deep in the weeds and kind of, watch that process unfold.
Like every new industry, the cryptocurrency industry has its share of problems despite the perfect underlying technology and brilliant minds working in the space. The current challenges and setbacks do not mean the entire industry is dead or we will be permanently stuck in a bear market. As underlying issues get resolved and the halving draws closer, the cycle will change and there will undoubtedly be other bear and bull markets in the future. In her interview, Lyn Alden also discussed an issue that Bitcoin investors and critics regularly raise. Is there enough reason to use your Bitcoin to buy coffee or other goods, especially if you believe each coin will be worth millions of dollars someday? Is it enough to just hold the crypto asset, hoping it would someday multiply in folds and become the world's reserve currency? Here's Lyn Alden's answer to whether many people will be willing to use their Bitcoin to make purchases.
Well, so I think in the near term they won't. Most people won't, right? So unless you need censorship resistance or you're in an environment where it's very expensive to operate, basically a lot of frictions in terms of payments, you won't. The only people that I think will long term are people who, over time, due to holding Bitcoin and due to appreciation of Bitcoin, and they don't want to go back to holding a lot of fiat, they eventually have so much Bitcoin, they want to spend their Bitcoin, right? So a lot of people that are spending Bitcoin now are people that have been holding it for 5 years, right? I think in the future, the people that have kind of been holding it now for 1, 2, 3 years, when they've been holding it for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and it's a much larger percentage of their net worth, I think an increasing number of them will want to spend it. In addition, you have things like micropayments. Like, I mean, Nostr is a good example, right? If you want to tip each other, these little tipping environments, or you want to pay a relay operator, $1. It's hard to do that with something like credit cards. It's also, if you do a credit cards, you're now losing anonymity, right? So it's useful for like pseudonymous like online payments, things like that. In addition, when you're talking about global payments or global remittances, there's these pretty high fees on a lot of different types of payments, and you're prone to censorship. You're prone to just not being allowed. Basically, all forms of ways that block your transaction going through, or various rent seekers along the way. And so, I don't think you're going to see a lot of Bitcoin payment activity until Bitcoin is much larger, much more widely held. And so I think it's a slow grind. But one thing to keep in mind is that everybody who accepts Bitcoin strengthens the network because it increases the censorship resistance of Bitcoin. Like, let's say there was a world where nobody actually accepted Bitcoin as payment, and all is only available on, like, say 10 exchanges worldwide, and you could convert fiat to Bitcoin. You could get your Bitcoin, you could self custody your Bitcoin, and nobody accepted the Bitcoin for anything. It wouldn't be a very censorship resistant network, because if governments wanted to stop it, they would just go to those 10 exchanges and say, okay, you're shut down, or you need to KYC everybody, XYZ. Already, the more people in the world have smartphones than bank accounts. So bank accounts had a multi-century head start, and still, in a given developing country, there's a sizable percentage of the population, and in some cases, a majority of the population that does not have a bank account. There's even things like there's like weird situations you can find yourselves in where there's almost no way to get a bank account. Like, let's say you're a refugee you leave a country, you go to another country, you don't have an ID with you for whatever reason, and the bank's like, well, we can't open without an ID. You're like, well, how do I get an ID? It's like, well, how do you prove, where you came from, what your birth is? It's like, well, if you can just get onboarded, with a private key and a smartphone, right? Now you're basically banked, right? And that also applies. The reason a lot of people in developing countries are not banked because they have like say $100, and the bank says, well, that's not worth our time, right? But if the whole process is automated, if you're talking about like a mobile app, right, that's more workable. So I think that in a first world, developed market context where we have dollars, euros, yen, and for us, in many cases, these assets are like portfolio holdings or even cold storage holdings that we're planning to just hold for a number of years. There's very little reason to spend Bitcoin except for maybe niche circumstances like again paying Nostr relays or things like that, think little online micropayments perhaps. But when you look at a global scale and long term, I think that's where you're likely to see basically these alternative payment rails be developed for either people that want censorship resistance, or that just find the technology to be better, more automated, and more accessible than what they get in fiat markets.
Would you be willing to use your Bitcoin to make purchases to strengthen the network and increase its censorship resistance? Please drop your replies as well as your comments on Lyn Alden's interview in the comments section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out our other crypto-related videos. Thanks for watching.